best job in the whole world is that I get to be a part of so many different areas of research. In this auditorium right now, there are probably at least 50 different programs represented. In this auditorium right now, there are probably at least 50 different programs represented. And watching us right now remotely, even more than that. And all of you, what you have in common is you're all working on some what I find in the vast majority of cases, really fascinating research that is meant to help us understand our world better or to solve problems. I feel like that in some small way I get to be a part of that, and I love it. So it's one thing I really love about this particular class. There's so many people from so many different areas involved. And starting tomorrow, many of you will be reading some of that research. You'll receive at least, well, at the most, 2 introductions, likely from an area. Today's class is about the methods section. And I also hope, in my small role as a professor helping you with science writing, or academic writing for the purposes of research publication, that in some way I help you in the future to get the word out. That maybe one of the people here today, maybe one of the people watching right now, will be the first Brazilian, from a Brazilian institution to receive a Nobel Prize. And it's a real shame that there is such good research out there that doesn't get published, a lot of times just because it's just not really well put together. That people don't know how to sell their research well sometimes. And one of the sections of a research article that is most problematic is the methods section. So today was originally called this method and results section, but I realized this week that didn't really make any sense, or as much sense, as putting the results and discussion section in one class, which will be next week. Today we're going to focus squarely on the methods section. And then we'll talk about results and discussion next week. Just a reminder, hopefully none of you will have forgotten, but there are still some people who have yet to turn in their midterm assignment. That's the web address to join, your class code. If you have a Google account, you can join through Google. And just a reminder that today by 23:59 local time, it will be due. After that, it's out of my hands. The system will close. It's already programmed to shut down, because then what will happen is the system will automatically redistribute your introductions to other students. So after that, you snooze, you lose. There is the form for submission, so I strongly encourage you to use that. And that's it. Just in case, I'll remind you once again before this class is over. All right. So going back, taking a few steps back, zooming out a little bit to our IMRAD structure. First of all, I should say that IMRAD is a convenient name that we give to the research article genre, because not the vast majority, but I would say the majority of research articles have this kind of structure of introduction, results, methods, results, and discussion. But of course, there are many types of research article that don't. And we'll talk about that today. Your article that you're writing may not have a method section. There are areas of science and of academia that don't necessarily have a method section or a results section per se. But there's a good chance that at some point, even if the article that you're writing for this class or that you're planning to publish in the near future, even if it doesn't have a method section, there's a good chance that one day you will have to consider a method section or something similar to it. So a few questions I want to ask today and I hope to answer is, first of all, why is the method section so important? Why does it matter? What makes a good method section and how does it connect to the introduction? It used to be that I didn't really deal with the method section in this class because I thought, well, the method section is so idiosyncratic. It is so particular to so many different areas of science. Every academic area, every academic discipline will have its own way of putting the method section together. Each research study, each supervisor will work on that individually with students. But what I find is, now having had some time to reflect about this course, that actually the method section is one of the most problematic in almost all of the manuscripts I look at from all areas of science. At CAPA, for example, or when I am doing reviews for articles in journals that I review for, the method section is one of the most problematic, and I would say is maybe the most fragile section in terms of tipping the scales for rejection of a manuscript. So first I'd like you to be aware of, why is the method section so important to begin with? And to do that, we're going to show you a little video. This video is very short. I think it's 2 minutes long. And what you're going to see, I just want to make sure you're paying attention. And you'll see in this video is nobody falling, but is a kind of mini experiment. Now, what you see there, I don't know if you can see it in the video or you in the auditorium, there are 8 deodorants there, which most of us are using today. And you're going to see some men using this deodorant and through a kind of experiment to decide which is the best deodorant, okay? Now, as you're watching, I just want you to think, okay, just remember, what is the method? What is the method being used in this experiment? The sound is not important. You're just going to hear the video. Can I use this keyboard?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Not this. All right, some free propaganda for degree for men there. Okay, so now imagine the following method section. Imagine that there's a method section that describes this experiment, and this is the method section. You tell me if it's good or not, why not? So men, n equals 8, were chosen for the experiment. After playing basketball, each man applied 2 different deodorants, one on each armpit. The young woman was recruited to judge how pleasing the smell of each deodorant was. Those of you who work in food science know this is called hedonicity. The female judge smelled each armpit, each time noticing her impressions. Her final analysis was then given based on, actually this is 4. It's 4 men, not 8, 4. Her final analysis was then given based on the notes taken. Okay, now imagine this is a method section that you're reviewing, and you are reviewers of an article with this method section. What questions about the method need answers? You can discuss the questions, if you like, with your classmates, and then submit the questions on a Go formative activity that's open now. They're good? Okay, so I'm going to read some of these because they're all very good. Os modelos foram diferentes, do que pode gerar viés de seleção, so selection bias. Não foi falado nada sobre a higiene prévia dos participantes, yep. So that's a variable that could influence the smell. It wasn't a blind study, so don't know if there's some kind of confounding variable, like maybe she liked one of the guys who's more handsome than the other or something like that. Yeah. What was the criterion for the judgment of the judge? Did she have any criteria that she was using? Uh-oh. Ela cheirava com a mesma intensidade cada axila analisada. Even the intensity with which the person was sniffing, was it like a, or was it, depending. It could change the outcome of the judgment. Ahá. Suor e sua interação com os hormônios que dá a característica do cheiro. O cheiro masculino, por exemplo, é mais intenso devido aos homens terem mais pelos, que estimulam tanto a produção de suor quanto... This person knows what they're talking about. Portanto, a quantidade de pelos pode ter um questionamento. Yeah, so even, is somebody hairier than you? Did they check that? Além disso, os cheiros possuem um código, ou seja, as diferentes moléculas de odor interagem com os neurônios, disperam... wow, very impressive. Here's another good one. Okay, so this would be in the material section, the material subsection of the method. How were the deodorants selected? Como foram selecionados os deodorantes? By what criterion? Or what criteria? How were the participants selected? How were they recruited? Was the avaliador calibrado? Was there some kind of, previous stage where they were calibrated? What parameters were used for the analysis? What aspects, how was odor operationalized? Yeah, we don't know about hydration either. And revisor pode considerar a análise incompleta, pois está baseada somente na opinião de uma única pessoa. So you have one female judge. So there could be some bias there. Again, how were the participants selected? A aplicação do desodorante não foi antes do jogo de basquete? So the intensity of the game, if it was applied after the play, could affect. And so on. People writing a lot of the same questions. And if you look at how this was originally written, this was the method. And as you can see, this is this doesn't mean that all those variables that we just talked about were not perhaps part of the experimental design. We don't know. We didn't see the sheet that the woman was using there to judge. We didn't see that. We did not see how the deodorants were selected. We did not see if there was any kind of calibration beforehand. We didn't see if they also checked for hairiness or anything like that. But maybe those things were part of the experiment. I doubt it, but let's say that they were part of that experiment. If that's true, then that should be here, right? That should be part of the description of the methods. But what do I see? I mean, this is an exaggeration, but what do I see all too often is just too little detail, too little description of the key elements here. Now, sometimes that happens, I think, perhaps if someone is writing directly in English, maybe they don't feel so confident about supplying detail, maybe they don't feel as comfortable in really going into greater detail and remembering things. Their memory while they're writing could be somewhat compromised by having to think in another language. However, I think that really it has to do with mostly people just not thinking about the reader as much as they should in terms of what information needs to go in there. As I've said before in this class, one of the issues is that you, master's student, you, doctoral student especially, you are working on your research so much that for you the details in a method seem almost obvious. They're so routine for you that you might forget some particular important points that need to go in there. So we're going to talk about that today, about thinking about the reader some more when you're writing your method section and possible questions that reader could raise. Now, this is going back to our IMRAD section then, and why it is important. It's because of this reader here, the naysayer. Good authors of method sections, they remember this person when they're writing. Now, not every article, as I said, has a method section, but the ability to defend your method is relevant to just about everyone. So even if your article doesn't have a method section, in very many cases, you're going to need to be able to help show the reader why you've chosen particular things. So even if you are not writing about an experiment, but say you're writing about a particular author, a literary author, or let's say you've chosen a philosopher, or some kind of exegesis of a text, you're going to have to be able to anticipate that the reader might be asking, why have you chosen this particular text? Why is it important to look at this particular author, and what framework are you using, and why are you using that particular framework? So just about in almost any area of academia, this is an important thing to be able to do. And so good authors, and when they're thinking about their method section, they keep this person in mind.
Professor.
Just a minute.
Okay. Carlos is asking your opinion about articles that describe methods as the following phrase, as described elsewhere.
So the question is, in a method section, when you might have a phrase as described elsewhere, or as described in Cali, 2012. And the question is, what do I think about that? Yes. Well, that's not an answer that's easy to give, because it depends on the broader context. So if that's the only thing in the methods section, that's probably not good. But It's all about what do you want to highlight to this person right here. So if it's a minor point in the method section, in your whole procedure, for example, and this procedure is very detailed, but it has been already described elsewhere, then in the same way that you would use a footnote in a text, you can say, as described in blah, 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 2012, or as described, not just elsewhere, because elsewhere can be anywhere, but as described in, or the procedure described by so-and-so. That's okay. If it's kind of parenthetical, if it's like a parenthesis, or if it's kind of like a footnote where you don't have to go into that. If you want to know more about details about this procedure, go to this guy here. Then yes. However, if it's a crucial part of your method, and it's important that you're thinking this guy needs to be able to understand exactly what I did, then maybe it's not a good idea. So as I go on further in the class, I think this person will be able to see what I'm talking about more.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, no
Professor.
problem. So let's go back to, we talked about this earlier this semester, why studies on why articles get rejected. And I talked about these authors before in this class in the context of English is according to empirical research, English alone is never pointed to as the main cause of rejection, or certainly not the sole cause of rejection. Let's go back again and look at what are some of the main causes of rejection of an article. So let's start with somebody from my field of science, this Journal of Second Language Writing, Diane Belcher, and she analyzed several manuscripts submitted from non-native speakers in different parts of the world and looked at their acceptance or rejection letters to look at why were these articles rejected and what happened in that case. And she found several categories, including problems in the literature review, problems in the results and discussion. We'll talk about discussion next week. But one of the top things, following only after use of language, especially style, was 66% of the reviews with a negative commentary. 66% of reviews with negative commentary were about the method section. If you look at Sullivan's work from 2002 regarding the Journal of Professional Nursing and why manuscripts are rejected according to his analysis, item number 8 in the top 10 is too little information about the method, or the method includes serious flaws. If you look at other things here, the number one reason is, and editors of journals will tell you this, they receive manuscripts that have nothing to do or not really a good fit for the journal. That's the number one reason articles are immediately rejected. Then content does not provide new information is too old, and so on. But number 8, problems with the method. If you look at Pearson's work about top 10 reasons articles are not accepted for publication in the journal Respiratory Care, starting from number 10, picking the wrong journal, in this case it's not the top one, but you have a number of issues that come up as common, including poor writing, but also get carried away in the discussion. And then, number 4, inadequate description of methods. Number 3 is poor study design. And then the top 2, in this case, is a failure to revise and resubmit after getting a review back from the journal. This happens a lot, maybe because they can't repeat the experiment, or they're just too tired of the article. They just simply get an invitation to change it and resubmit it, and they don't. And the number 1 is simply not submitting a manuscript after they've sent an abstract. So number 4, inadequate description of methods. McKercher et al. From the Journal of Hospitality and Tourism, they report a number of similar categories terms including writing style, organization, conclusions, and so on. But the number one thing is method. With 74% of the manuscript reviews reporting some problem of method when the article is rejected. So to provide a synthesis of these studies that report why articles are rejected, pay attention to the ones that have check marks. So for example, wrong journal, Diane Belcher doesn't report that as a problem or a main reason, but the other three do. But look at the other ones. In this class, we've already talked about, especially these here, how to be aware of or how to improve writing that's difficult to follow, how to make your contribution clear, and what is new about the study clear. So those things here especially are, there's a unanimity, there's a consensus among those studies about how those are problematic. We're going to be talking about discussion next week, which is also pointed to as being problematic by all four of those authors or studies. But the number one thing is faulty method, where none of those authors point to as a main reason is poor English is not cited in any of those studies. Let me show you an example of a rejection that I gave recently to a manuscript that was submitted to an international journal based in the UK. But the authors were, I think, from Brazil, based on what their subject was, which was looking at what do Brazilian journals say about having to submit in English or not. And here's what I wrote. I found the article to be well written and with a mostly clear purpose. Unfortunately, there is a disconnect between what the research questions portend and what the paper ultimately delivers. One of the problems is to do with methodology. First, there is very little transparency. We know that the authors sample from 98 English medium journals indexed by Cielo, yet we do not learn much about Cielo, nor why it was chosen for this study. Further, the authors report that 7 subject areas were ultimately included in the corpus, but we do not know anything about why these subject areas were chosen, the sample size of each, nor even the size of the corpus as a whole. The method section then abruptly skips to the results and discussion section with many questions left unanswered. So a couple of things I want to highlight here. First, that the article was well written. It was a well-written article. There was absolutely no problem with the English whatsoever. Grammar was perfect, good vocabulary, good style. It was a very well-written article. But the main thing was that you couldn't understand what the method was that they used. And then they went to a discussion section with very little transparency about what was involved. And there were other problems with this study too. It wasn't just that. As you'll see next week. Next week we'll see another example to illustrate the idea that it's almost never just one thing that causes an article to get rejected. In this case, this is one of other things, but this is one of the main reasons. When we review articles, we have usually a criteria sheet, and this is an example of one. And as you can see here, one of the criteria is about methodology. Are methodological and or theoretical matters comprehensively described? This is kind of a big, vague concept for people. What do you mean comprehensively described? And you can say a lot about something or you can say very little. How much should go in is a question that a lot of people ask. You know, what information should go in there? And the answer to that question is what does comprehensively describe mean? It means not in a vacuum, doesn't mean describe as much detail as you can. It means anticipate the questions that might be asked. What would the naysayer ask about the experiment or the research that you're doing? So, what makes a good method section in the IMRAD structure is another characteristic of it, is one that ties back to what was said before in the introduction section. So, we saw a kind of funny example in a YouTube video of this deodorant experiment. But in a minute, I'm going to show you another one, which is an actual published study with this title, The Effect of Meat Consumption on Body Odor Attractiveness. Who's a vegan here? Anybody here is vegan or vegetarian? Yeah. Well, you're going to, after you read this study, after we talk about this study today, you're going to be very glad that you are. After I read this, I thought maybe I should change. Take meat out of my diet. So, I chose this article because I think the subject is interesting, but also it's understandable by just about anybody, really. And this was published in an Oxford journal, Chemical Senses. And basically it's exactly what the title talks about. So, if a man eats meat, is he less attractive to women? That's the basic idea behind the article. What do you guys think? I see people saying, yeah, definitely going to be. Certainly if he eats like this guy, probably not going to smell that good. All right. So what I want you to do is, in order to talk about this and talk about how the introduction relates to the method section, I'd like you to online, is it on Moodle? Yeah, and it's also on my web page, so on our web page for this class and also on Moodle. There is this article here online. I'm going to want you to download it, but only read the introduction section and answer this question, which is in the third paragraph. What non-genetic factors can influence body odor? I'll give you, say 5 minutes maximum for that. That question is just to, you don't have to write anything, just answer in your head, basically. Just for you to identify those points. Really? Oh boy. Go back to August, please. Another non-genetic aspect of smell is that there have been studies that say mood affects your sense of smell. So they've already talked about two important things here, that mood and menstrual cycle. And then of course, then they move on, they start moving towards their move number 2. What is their gap? What is their contribution of this particular article? To get to this point, they had to talk about the other things, and now they're going to talk about food. And they're talking about eating habits. So this is the non-genetic thing that nobody talks about or hasn't been talked about enough, even though, I love this, for instance, Hindu Indians who are usually vegetarians say that people who eat meat smell bad because of it, as Komarek, personal communication. I mean, sometimes people do cite personal communication in their research, but it could be anything. I just myself, I imagine Komarek sending a WhatsApp message like, oh man, I'm sitting next to this person, and because she eats meat, she smells really bad. I don't know. I just think this is really funny. It's really funny that people talk about, a personal communication. But the point is that the person is making is that we know about genetics. We know that hormones and the menstrual cycle can affect one's sense of smell. We know that mood can, according to research, and eating, but to our knowledge, however, this effect has not been tested under controlled conditions. So this is their main thing. So to recap, the authors have established territory, first discussing what we already know about genetics and odor. Then they talk about non-genetic factors and odor, and what we still don't know enough about, and that's about the eating. So now I'd like you to go on and read the method section, but for one specific thing, can you find elements that were raised in the introduction section in the method section? Go ahead. You don't have to write anything, just find them. Que formulário é esse?
Esse é o da chamada.
Oh.
Essas são as 3 palavras que a gente
Okay.
e eles vão escrever. 15.
Has anybody talked about the slides problem on Moodle?
Não,
Okay.
não. Põe 38. Vai aqui.
This is why I prefer to have 2 sources, because Moodle, oh man, the problems I've had with Moodle before.
Yeah. Já quando assim, eu li, assim, voltar a atenção, você vai ver.
Não sei, não consegui voltar.
Depois remota, né? Agora presencial, chamando.
Deixa eu voltar.
Escolha. Chamando inglês. Tá lá. Enviando.
Are you going to do the chamada now for the auditorium?
I just put the paper.
Oh, of course.
So they know.
Yeah.
So I will not stop you. Não tem problema. Sniff. Disponibilidade. Do 5 até 38.
Obrigada.
Just one more minute. Let's see. I know, and I'm glad the person asked this, actually. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right, so I mean, when you read this method section, you begin to get a better picture of what they did and how they did it, and to a large extent why. So they had these pads, right, that were collection devices, and the guys put them there for a while, and then they would take these out and they would put them in Ziploc bags, and then they were sent for analysis. Which is in itself, I just find particularly funny and awkward. But some people already began to ask questions and saying, okay, well, why they didn't explain why these females and why these particular females. And there are other things that in the method that you could see that were perhaps missing. For example, that issue of the hair. I don't think that was in there. I can't remember that being in there. All these things about why only females, why hair wasn't taken into account, would be something that would go into your limitations. And we're going to talk about limitations next week and the week after that as well, and how to put those into your discussion. But let's go back now first to what elements of the introduction were inserted into the method section. So you can see here that they did talk about the menstrual cycle, mood, and diet. All those things that were talked about in the introduction are now brought into the method as variables that they controlled. So none of the women were using hormonal contraception, and all reported having normal menstrual cycle length, 25 to 40 days. And so they didn't just say normal and leave it at that. They said, what are we considering normal is 25 to 40 days. They're defining that. They were also asked about the date of the onset of the last menstrual bleeding, i.e. day 1. Women in days 9 to 15 of their cycle on the testing day were judged to be in fertile phase and others to be in non-fertile phases of the cycle. And then you have mood and diet as well. Here you have the odor donors. Followed our diet protocol for 2 weeks, so they talk about their diet, and there was a protocol for it, and they describe what that is. Talk about the period. It was prior to odor sampling, so there was a time one, and there was a prior control. So they, unlike the basketball odor experiment, there was control of diet beforehand, and they were also asked to keep a diet diary, in which they recorded all food eaten during the day and alcoholic beverages and level of stress, fatigue, and general mood. And so you see mood using a 7-point scale. They don't talk about what scale they use, so that could be a problem, and how they arrived at that scale, but they do account for it. So here you see that elements in the method tie right back to the introduction. And so things that are in the method are linked to important points that affect the method section, and therefore the introduction is written thinking of points that you want to raise in the method section. And these details help you understand the big picture. you can get a picture of more or less what happened in that experiment and how it was done. People make the mistake of thinking that the method section is about replicability. It is to some extent. If there's a recipe book, a book of recipes, and you have the ingredients in that recipe and the procedure of how to make a particular dish, then you expect that that recipe has ingredients and the description is rich enough so that people can reproduce that recipe or adapt it in any context or many different contexts. But that's not really the only, or maybe not even the main reason for a method section. It's not about replication so much. It's about being able to understand and the reader will understand, how did you get that? How did you arrive at your results? That's key, because your results will be an artifact of the method that you used. And so the naysayer, he's going to be looking for, okay, how were these participants recruited? How old were they? Why these particular participants? How were they calibrated? And so on. All these points that you already brought up. Getting back to the food analogy, I actually like to cook. I'm not saying that I cook well, but I like to cook. And my mother-in-law, I consider a better cook than myself. I love going over to her house because of many reasons, but one of which is there's always good food at my mother-in-law's house. And so sometimes, actually I've stopped doing this, sometimes I used to ask her, I'd say, Sogra, this food is delicious in Portuguese. And sometimes I used to ask her, how did you do it? I stopped asking because her description of her method was always insufficient. For example, I'd ask about, I love the way she makes her meat. But I ask, okay, essa carne da chapa, tão boa, como você faz tão macia? And it's always a description that, involves more onomatopoeia than anything else. So it's sort of like, você pega uma carne, aí coloca o azeite, o óleo na panela e faz e pronto, fica pronto. It can't be just that, there's other things involved, but, I ask her every time about how she does it, and it seems like there's a different ingredient each time. I don't get a picture of how to create what she does through her noises that she makes. That's okay. It's not an article that she's writing. But for you guys, you're going to have to be able to think, okay, is the picture being painted adequately enough for a critical reading? Questions being answered here. And so here, when they talk about their participants, it's not so bad. They say how many? 17 males, but they say where they're from. They talk about how old they were, minimum and maximum, so mostly young guys. We know about more or less what they looked like in terms of their body, how tall they were, and how heavy they were. We know about that they didn't smoke, that they didn't have any rheumatological or other diseases, and we know that they were hairy. We know how much they were paid for their participation, and potential inconvenience was more than they couldn't sleep with their partners during this experiment from what I read, so it was actually a lot more inconvenient than that. But we have, some general picture here. Is it perfect? No. I think there are other questions that could be asked, but it's a much better picture than what we get here.
Can you have a break? We are having problems with the audio.
Oh. How long of a break? Paint the picture. 10 minutes? Oh, we're almost done. We're in the reta final.
Because I think you will need to
Go back?
Yes, go back some slides because of the remote.
How many slides?
We don't have sure, but it's not much.
I think, to be honest with you, Kylie, think that I think we should just carry on.
So we continue and we work on the issue.
Okay. So, as I was saying, repeating, as I was saying, this is not perfect, but you do get some sense of the big picture here. In this case, we're talking about the order donors, just the participants. This whole section here, this whole paragraph, is just about the order donors. Compare that to this. Men, n equals 4, were chosen for the experiment. And this would be the only thing about the participants here. You might think that's an exaggeration, but I actually have seen articles with something similar to this. I have even seen doctoral theses and master's dissertations with not much more than this, when really much more information was needed. All of those questions that we just saw here about who they were, where they were from, how old they were, why they agreed to participate, and all of this. And I mean, obviously, in one of my studies, I do stuff based on teaching and writing. I'm not going to ask participants how old they were. It would be strange to talk about academic authors and say, I asked 10 scientists from UFPR to provide a sample of their academic writing, and they weighed 75 to 88 kilos. That would be very strange. So what goes into your method section will depend on the nature of your study. What's relevant depends on your study, but certainly much more than this. In the hypothetical study that I just talked about, I could talk about how long they had been teaching, or if they had experience writing before, and so on. Whatever I deem relevant, in order to answer the possible questions that the naysayer could ask. So something like this, even though I say as I said, it's kind of exaggerated, it's not too far off from the truth. And this is not just me saying that. You can see that all of the research I presented before, they all talk about this being a problem. One of the main reasons that articles get rejected is because of inadequate description in the method section. What does inadequate mean? Meaning not being able to anticipate key questions that the naysayer might ask. And so when you're writing your method section, well, how fresh were the smells when they smelled them? These are questions similar to the ones that you asked about the video. No. What about the effects of repeated testing? So if you're smelling one and then again and again, would that affect? These are questions that the authors heard in their heads when they were writing. So, okay, I better think. He might ask, how do you know participants followed instructions? And then you see in the text their answer. Here's their answer to that question. The question isn't in the text, but they heard it and they answered this question in the text. Why is that in there? Because they're answering that question. They're anticipating that as a possible question. And they answer it like this: to check the odor donor's conformity with the instructions, we carefully examine the diet diaries. But what about odor contamination from outside smells? And it replies, To avoid odor contamination from odor donors' clothes or background odor, the donors were asked to wear new white 100% cotton t-shirts, previously washed without washing powder as the first layer of clothes. You can almost hear them thinking, okay, we better talk about odor contamination. But we better say also what color they were, and for whatever reason, and that they were previously washed without washing powder, because somebody could say, but what kind of washing powder did you use? And that might have affected the smell. So they're already putting that in there. And then they say, that the next morning they put the pads, these axillary pads, in Ziploc plastic bags and handed them back to the experimenters. So that is to address the question also, well, how fresh were the smells? The writers are thinking about this question, and so they answer, well, to avoid possible effects of refrigeration on the stimuli, olfactory rating of the sample started within an hour after collection. So within an hour, already the rating started. So then they anticipate this question. What about the effects of repeated testing? And then the authors answer that. To test the possible effect of repeated testing, we perform repeated measures ANOVA for each of the dependent variables. Maybe there are other questions that they should have also anticipated. Probably there were. But they did a pretty good job. You can see it in their answering of this method, that they're hearing the naysayer and they're answering the question before it's raised. So good writers of method section, good method sections, anticipate these questions. And they don't say just what often. Many times they also say why. So what do I usually see? Just this. This is very typical of a method section that may not be completely developed. We carefully examined the diet diaries. That's fine. But better is this. This one is just a pure description. It's Wikipedia. That one answers the naysayer. To check the odor donors' conformity with the instructions, we carefully examine the diet diaries. Another example from the same article. The donors were asked to wear new white 100% cotton t-shirts. Okay, again, that's a fact. That's a description. You can replicate using just this, but they add. So better, they write this. To avoid odor contamination from other donors' clothes or background color, the donors were asked to wear new white 100% cotton t-shirts. So, zooming out again to our IMRAD, on the first or second day of class, I already talked about how this hourglass reflects the basic shape of an article, starting sort of broadly, narrowing down to the method you use, then the results of your research, and then a broad discussion of all of that. That's important, but a lot of you already know this already. Less talked about, perhaps, is how these connect, how the introduction should connect to the method, which connects to the results, which connects to the discussion, and as we've seen today, how the method connects back to the introduction and vice versa. Another way of putting all of this, though, would be to say that IMRAD really is about, first of all, starting with why are you doing something? Why is this article important? Why is this subject important? That's roughly the equivalent of the introduction. And then going on to how. How did you address this? If the why involves you establishing a territory, establishing a niche, and then occupying a niche, then how does your article occupy that niche? How does it address this problem that you raise? Or this issue that you wish to explore? How is the equivalent of a method section. Where your results then, therefore, are the what. Okay, so now that you did that, what did you find? What are your conclusions? What are your findings? And then finally, and we're going to talk about this as well next week, and this is a section that a lot of people don't talk about enough, is the discussion being basically the so what. So now that you've talked about the why, the how, and the what, so what? Why is this important? What do you conclude about what you found? What does this mean in the bigger picture? And we'll be talking about those two things, the results, but especially the discussion section starting next week. All right, so to finish, please do not forget the clock is ticking. If you haven't turned in your introduction yet, you have until 11:59, so get out your coffee, whatever you need, your tea, whatever it is that you need to finish up. There is your the website, and tomorrow, October 10th, you can't do it anymore, you can't submit anymore, but you will receive introduction to give feedback on, and we will be busy elves looking at your introductions as well on this sheet here. However, you still have more homework, so if you've already turned in your introduction, you're not off the hook. On my website, so on the class page of our website, first of all, I'd like you to choose just one of the articles under today, Module 7. Just one of the articles, and just read only the discussion section. They're short discussions. They're less than a page. So just read one article's discussion, not the whole article, if you want to, of course. But I'm asking you just to download one article and read just the discussion section. That's the first thing. And then in that discussion section that you choose, answer these 3 questions, and you don't have to write them anywhere. I just want you to be prepared to talk about them with another person in the auditorium or wherever you are for next class, which is, can you identify the authors, first of all, admitting a limitation? As we'll talk about again next week and the week after that, a lot of people believe that you shouldn't talk about limitations in your articles, and I'm going to suggest the opposite. So first of all, can you identify where authors are admitted limitation? B, anywhere in the discussion the authors talk about the practical implications of their work? And C, authors comparing the results of their work to other authors. And then finally, you've already looked at this article before in this class, which is quantifying the burden of writing research, data from Mexican scientists. So Hanauer and Englander. So if you go to my website, on our class page, there's at the top of the website, at the top of that page, there's a list of bibliographic references. You go down to H, and you'll find this article if you've already downloaded it once for this class, and identify the same points in the discussion section A, B, and C here. And that's for next class. And that's it. That's a wrap.
Pessoal, algumas mensagens finais, tá? Então vamos lá. Semana passada o Moodle estava com problema. Por causa disso, né? Ninguém respondeu chamada, tá? Então, todos vão ficar com presença em relação à aula passada, a aula do dia 2 de outubro. Tá bom? O outro aviso é o seguinte. Quem respondeu o Goal Formative dessa semana? Quais são as duas perguntas que foram feitas? Tá? Então, quem não respondeu, por favor, responda, tá? O motivo é o seguinte: algumas pessoas fizeram um cadastro no Goal Formative com apelidos ou outra coisa. E aí a gente está com nota perdida, a gente não consegue associar o aluno, tá bom? Então, para garantia de vocês, certo? Por favor, forneçam o nome corretamente e o e-mail que vocês recebem mensagens do Moodle, tá bom? Tá? Tudo isso é para garantir que vocês fiquem com a devida nota de vocês, tá bom? Tá? Então, é isso daí, pessoal. Obrigado, uma boa semana. E quem tiver que fazer a introdução para hoje, boa introdução.